Mark Reynolds had never been the kind of employee who demanded attention. For 5 years, he worked quietly, behind the scenes at a major logistics company in New York, building and maintaining a system that most people barely understood. But everyone depended on his day started early, often before sunrise, preparing breakfast for his 8-year-old son, Ethan, before dropping him off at school. Then came long hours at the office, solving problems no one else could fix, patching issues before they became disasters. To others, it looked like routine work. To Mark, it was a responsibility he carried with quiet pride, knowing that every line of code and every adjustment he made kept the company running smoothly. Life hadn't been easy since his wife passed away 3 years earlier. Suddenly, he had to become everything for Ethan. A father, a mother, a source of strength even when he felt like he had none left. There were nights he stayed up late after work, helping with homework, cooking meals, and making sure his son never felt the absence too deeply. Sleep became a luxury, and rest felt like something he could no longer afford. Yet despite everything, Mark never complained. His job wasn't just a paycheck. It was stability, the one thing he could rely on, in a life that had already taken so much from him. At the office, however, things were beginning to change. Rumors started spreading about a new direction. The company wanted to take something about innovation, modernization, and bringing in fresh talent. Mark didn't pay much attention at first. He believed that results mattered more than trends, and his work spoke for itself. But the day of the big announcement, he felt a shift in the air. Employees gathered in the conference room as the CEO stood confidently at the front, outlining her vision for the future. She spoke about efficiency, cutting-edge solutions, and a new team of top experts who would elevate the company to the next level. Mark listened carefully, his expression calm, but his thoughts uneasy. There was something in her tone that made him feel like the past. His work, his contributions, was being quietly dismissed. When she mentioned restructuring and hinted that some roles would no longer be necessary, attention spread across the room. Mark felt it settle in his chest, heavy and undeniable still. He stayed composed. He had always believed that dedication and hard work would protect him. In the days that followed, the new team arrived. They were confident, highly educated, and carried themselves with an air of certainty that made it clear they believed they were an upgrade. Mark tried to welcome them, offering to explain how the system functioned. Its hidden dependencies, the small details that weren't documented but were critical to its stability. But his attempts were brushed aside. They skimmed through files, made assumptions, and dismissed his warnings as outdated thinking. To them, he was just part of the old system. They were there to replace. One afternoon, Mark was called into a meeting. He already knew what was coming, though he held on to a small hope that his years of loyalty might count for something. Sitting across from management, he listened as they spoke in careful, professional tones about organizational changes and new strategic direction. The words felt distant, almost rehearsed. When they finally told him his position was being eliminated, the room fell into a quiet stillness. Mark nodded slowly, absorbing the moment without argument. He thought about Ethan, about rent, about everything that depended on this job, but he didn't let any of it show. As he packed his belongings into a small box, the office around him continued as if nothing had happened. Conversations carried on, keyboards clicked, and the new experts moved confidently through the space that no longer belonged to him. When Mark walked out of the building, the city felt louder than usual, the noise echoing the uncertainty in his mind. He paused for a moment, looking back at the place where he had given so much of himself. It wasn't just a job he was leaving behind. It was a part of his identity. And as he stepped forward into the unknown, one thought lingered quietly. They didn't understand what they had just lost. 30 days after Mark walked out of the company, the system he had built began to unravel in ways no one had anticipated. It started with small glitches, delayed shipments, incorrect tracking updates, minor inconsistencies that the new experts initially dismissed as routine bugs. But beneath the surface, deeper issues were forming, hidden within layers of complexity only Mark had fully understood. The system wasn't just code. It was a delicate balance of interconnected processes, patched and refined over years of real-world challenges. Without that understanding, even the smallest change could trigger a chain reaction. By the second week, the problems escalated. Entire regions reported failures in shipment coordination. Warehouses couldn't sync their data, delivery routes overlapped or disappeared entirely, and customers began flooding support lines with complaints. The new team worked around the clock analyzing data, rewriting sections of the system and applying quick fixes. But every solution seemed to create two new problems. The confidence they had arrived with started to fade, replaced by tension and quiet panic. In the executive offices, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The CEO, who had once spoken so confidently about innovation and progress, now faced mounting pressure from partners and investors. Meetings grew longer, voices sharper, and patience thinner. Reports showed losses climbing into the millions, and worse, the company's reputation was beginning to suffer. For the first time, she started asking questions that no one could answer. Why was the system failing so unpredictably? Why couldn't her new expert stabilize it? The truth surfaced slowly, almost reluctantly. One senior engineer admitted that much of the system's core logic wasn't fully documented. There were custom integrations, manual overrides, and hidden safeguards. Things that only someone deeply familiar with its history would know. Another mentioned Mark's name, at first cautiously, then with growing certainty. He built most of it, they said. He knew how everything connected. The room fell silent as the realization settled in. The man they had let go wasn't just another employee. He had been the foundation holding everything together. Swallowing her pride, the CEO made a decision she never thought she would have to make. She asked her assistant to find Mark. It didn't take long. He hadn't disappeared or moved away. In fact, he was working a modest job at a small local warehouse, doing basic inventory management, far below his capabilities, but enough to keep his life stable. When she arrived there, the contrast was striking. There were no polished floors or glass walls, just the steady rhythm of honest work, and there was Mark focused, calm, carrying boxes as if the weight of the past month hadn't broken him. When he saw her, there was a brief moment of surprise, but it quickly settled into quiet understanding. He didn't seem angry or bitter, just distant, as though he had already accepted everything and moved on. The CEO approached him, her usual confidence replaced by something unfamiliar. For a moment, she struggled to find the right words. This wasn't a boardroom, and there were no prepared statements to rely on. "We need your help," she finally said, her voice more honest than it had ever been. Before Mark studied her for a second, not with defiance but with clarity. He already knew why she was there. News of the company's struggles had spread, and he understood exactly what had gone wrong. The system hadn't failed on its own. It had been misunderstood. He set the box he was holding down, carefully wiping his hands as he took a breath. In that moment, he wasn't just a former employee being asked to fix a mistake. He was someone who had been overlooked, dismissed, and now suddenly needed. "The balance had shifted. I can fix it," he said calmly, his voice steady. Then he paused, meeting her eyes in a way he never had before. "But this time things will be different." It wasn't a demand filled with anger. It was something stronger, built on self-respect. And as the CEO stood there, realizing what she had lost and what she now needed to regain, she understood that this wasn't just about repairing a broken system. It was about acknowledging the value of the person who had quietly held everything together all along.